I've been a cardiologist for 23 years. I've seen hearts stop, restart, skip beats, race at impossible speeds, and flutter like dying birds. I've watched chambers collapse, arteries explode, and valves fail in ways that would make textbooks weep. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I encountered on that Tuesday morning in October at Cedar-Sinai Medical Center. The page came at 6:47 a.m., right as I was finishing my first cup of coffee in the doctor's lounge. Dr. Harrison Tua Stat. Dr. Harrison Tua Stat. The metallic voice echoed through the corridors as I made my way down, my mind already running through the usual emergencies: heart attacks, arrhythmias, maybe a dissecting aortic aneurysm, if I was unlucky. Dr. Rebecca Martinez met me at the entrance to Trauma Bay 3, her usually composed face tight with confusion. Rebecca had been an ER physician for 12 years. She didn't rattle easily. "Michael, thank God you're here," she said, falling into step beside me. "I've got a 34-year-old female, no known cardiac history, brought in by her roommate after she collapsed at home. But Mike... She paused, her hand catching my arm. "The EKG doesn't make sense." "Doesn't make sense how?" "You need to see it yourself." Sarah Chen lay on the gurney, awake and alert, her dark eyes tracking our movement as we entered. She appeared completely normal, healthy color, no obvious distress, breathing unlabored. If I had passed her on the street, I would have assumed she was heading to yoga class, not lying in a trauma bay. "Ms. Chen, I'm Dr. Harrison, cardiology," I said, approaching the bed. "How are you feeling?" "Fine, actually," she replied, her voice steady. "I don't understand why everyone seems so worried. I just felt dizzy for a moment." I glanced at the monitor above her bed, and my world tilted. The EKG rhythm strip showed something that violated every principle of cardiac electrophysiology I had ever learned. The QRS complexes, the spikes that represent the heart's main pumping action, were appearing in a pattern that was mathematically impossible. They seemed to be occurring in sequences that suggested the heart was beating backwards through time. "Rebecca, how long has this been going on?" "Since she got here. We've changed the leads 3 times, calibrated the machine twice, even switched to a different monitor. Same reading every time." I studied the strip more carefully. The P waves, which should precede each heartbeat, were appearing after the Q complexes, as if the heart's electrical system had decided to rewrite the laws of physics. But more disturbing than the backward sequence was the pattern itself. It looked familiar, like an echo of something I had seen before, but couldn't quite place. "Ms. Chen, have you ever had any heart problems, any procedures, surgeries, even as a child?" "Never. I run 5 miles every morning. My last physical was 6 months ago. Everything was perfect." I pressed my stethoscope to her chest, and what I heard made my blood run cold. Her heart sounded normal, strong, regular, healthy. But the rhythm I was hearing didn't match what the monitor was showing. It was as if her physical heart and her electrical heart were existing in 2 different realities. "I want a full workup," I told Rebecca. "Complete metabolic panel, cardiac enzymes, thyroid function, tox screen, and get me an echo stat." "Already ordered," she replied. "Labs should be back in an hour." I looked back at the monitor, watching those impossible waves dance across the screen. In medical school, they teach you that when you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras. Look for common explanations before exotic ones. But sometimes, very rarely, the hoofbeats really do belong to something that shouldn't exist. "Ms. Chen, I'm going to be honest with you. Your EKG is showing some unusual patterns. We need to run some tests to figure out what's going on." She nodded, calmly, too calmly. "Doctor, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever feel like your heart remembers things your mind has forgotten?" The question hit me like ice water. I stared at her, searching for signs of altered mental status, drug use, psychiatric issues. But her eyes were clear, intelligent, and utterly serious. "I'm not sure I understand what you mean. Sometimes I feel like my heart has been places I've never been, felt things I've never felt. Does that sound crazy?" Before I could answer, the monitor began alarming. Sarah's impossible rhythm had just become something even more extraordinary. It was now displaying the cardiac signature of someone who had been dead for exactly 4 minutes and 37 seconds. But Sarah Chen was sitting up, smiling at me with perfect, vital signs. If you're fascinated by medical mysteries that defy explanation, hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments. Have you ever experienced something that medical science couldn't explain? This case was just the beginning of something that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the human heart. The lab results arrived an hour later, and they made everything worse. Sarah Chen's troponin levels, the enzyme that indicates heart muscle damage, were simultaneously elevated and normal, depending on which lab you asked. The first draw showed levels consistent with a massive heart attack. The second draw, taken 10 minutes later from the same 4 line, showed levels of a perfectly healthy individual. The third draw came back with troponin levels that belonged to someone who had been dead for weeks. "This is impossible," muttered Janet Kowalski, our head lab technician, as she brought me the results. Personally, Janet had been running cardiac labs for 15 years and prided herself on precision. "I've run these samples 4 times each. The blood is from the same patient, same time, same tube. But look at this." She spread the lab sheets across the nurse's station counter. Each set of results told a different story. Normal electrolytes, then critically low potassium. Perfect kidney function, then acute renal failure. It was as if Sarah's blood was changing its molecular composition between the lab and the analyzer. "Janet, I need you to draw fresh samples. Use a different phlebotomist. Different tubes. Send them to an outside lab." Already did that an hour ago. UCLA got the same impossible results. I made my way to the echo lab, where Sarah was undergoing her echocardiogram. Through the observation window, I watched Dr. David Kim, our chief sonographer, frown at his screen. David had performed over 10,000 echoes. I'd never seen him look confused. "Michael, you need to see this," he called as I entered the darkened room. The ultrasound image on the screen showed Sarah's heart in real time, but what I was seeing violated basic anatomy. Her left ventricle appeared to be contracting normally, but occasionally, for just a frame or two, it would show the scarred, thickened walls of someone who had suffered multiple heart attacks. Then it would snap back to appearing perfectly healthy. "David, are you getting artifact from patient movement? She's been perfectly still. Watch this." He adjusted the probe angle, and for a moment, the image showed what appeared to be surgical sutures in her cardiac tissue, sutures that would be present after open heart surgery. Then they vanished. Has she ever had cardiac surgery? According to her chart, no. But look at this. He switched to another view, and I saw what appeared to be a pacemaker wire clearly visible in her right ventricle. "Now watch." He held the probe steady, and the wire faded away like smoke. Sarah lay on the examination table, eyes closed, seemingly unaware of our growing alarm. Her chest rose and fell with peaceful regularity, but on the monitor, her heart was showing me glimpses of procedures she had never undergone, damage she had never sustained, devices that were never implanted. "I want an MRI," I said, though I was beginning to suspect that every test would only deepen the mystery. "Already scheduled for this afternoon," David replied. "But Michael, I've been doing this for 20 years. Hearts don't change their structure. During an examination, hearts don't show surgical history that doesn't exist." I stared at the screen as Sarah's ventricle flickered between healthy and diseased, young and old, whole and broken. "No," I agreed quietly, "they don't." The MRI results came back normal. Perfectly, impossibly normal. By Thursday morning, I was beginning to question my own sanity. Every test we ran on Sarah Chen produced results that contradicted the previous one, yet she remained the picture of health, chatting pleasantly with nurses and asking thoughtful questions about her care. The hospital's medical equipment seemed to be playing an elaborate joke. But medical equipment doesn't have a sense of humor. I found myself spending more time in her room than any of my other patients, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't name. During one of these visits, as I was reviewing her chart for the 100th time, Sarah broke the comfortable silence with a question that stopped my heart cold. "Dr. Harrison, do you remember Mrs. Patterson?" I looked up from the chart. "I'm sorry, Eleanor Patterson, 73 years old. She came in 3 years ago with chest pain that felt like an elephant sitting on her chest." That's exactly how she described I-10 elephant. Sarah's voice was conversational, almost dreamy. "You performed her cardiac catheterization on a Wednesday afternoon. It was raining." My pen slipped from my fingers. Eleanor Patterson had been one of my patients, but I had never mentioned her to Sarah. There was no way Sarah could know about her. "How do you?" She was terrified of the procedure. Sarah continued, her eyes focused on something I couldn't see. Her hands were shaking when they brought her into the cath lab. She kept asking if her daughter would make it in time. "You told her everything. Would be fine. That her daughter was already on her way from San Diego." Every detail was correct. Eleanor Patterson had been a widow who lived alone, and her daughter had driven through a rainstorm to be there for the procedure. But these weren't details from any medical record. They were personal moments that had occurred in the cath lab. "Sarah, how could you possibly know about Mrs. Patterson?" She turned to look at me then, and for a moment, her young face seemed to carry the weight of decades. I remember the feeling of the catheter threading through her coronary arteries. The way her heart stuttered when you inflated the balloon to open the blocked vessel. She thought about her late husband right at that moment, wondered if she was going to see him again. My mouth went dry. What Sarah was describing weren't just procedural details. She was recounting Eleanor's thoughts during the procedure. Thoughts that Eleanor had never shared with anyone. The blockage was in her left anterior descending artery. Sarah continued, her voice taking on a clinical precision that chilled me. 90% occlusion. You used a drug-eluting stent, 3.5 mm by 18 mm. Her ejection fraction improved from 35% to 52% post-procedure. Those specifications were exact, down to the millimeter. But what made my hands shake was what she said next. She cried afterward, when she thought no one was looking, not from pain, but from relief. She said a prayer thanking God for letting her see her granddaughter's wedding. Eleanor Patterson had whispered that prayer in recovery. When I had briefly checked on her late that evening, I was the only person who had heard it. Sarah, I need you to tell me how you know these things. Do you remember James Morrison? 47 years old, admitted with a STEMI last December. She wasn't listening to my question, lost in whatever visions were playing behind her eyes. You worked on him for 40 minutes. His heart stopped twice during the procedure. James Morrison, the investment banker who had collapsed at his office Christmas party. Another patient I had never mentioned to Sarah. Another case with details that weren't in any chart she could have accessed. He kept thinking about his son's baseball game, she said softly. How he had missed the winning hit because he was stuck in surgery with a client. He promised himself that if he lived, he'd never miss another game. Sarah, stop. My voice came out sharper than I intended. I need to know how you know about my patients. Have you been accessing medical records? Talking to staff members? She looked at me with those dark, impossibly calm eyes. Dr. Harrison, I've never met Mrs. Patterson or Mr. Morrison. I've never seen their files or spoken to anyone about them. Then how do you remember Maria Santos, the 19-year-old with the congenital defect? You repaired her ventricular septal defect when she was 7. She came back to see you last year because she was getting married and wanted to make sure her heart was strong enough to have children. My breath caught. Maria Santos wasn't even my current patient. She had been transferred to my colleague Dr. Williams for her adult care. There was no reason Sarah would know about her. No way she could access those old pediatric records. She was scared during that childhood surgery, Sarah continued. She kept asking for her mother. You held her hand until the anesthesia took effect. She never forgot that kindness. This is impossible, I whispered. Sarah smiled then, and it was the saddest smile I had ever seen. Hearts remember, Dr. Harrison. They remember everything we think we've forgotten. Every procedure, every emotion, every moment of fear and hope. Hearts are witnesses. The monitor above her bed continued its impossible rhythm, and I suddenly realized what it reminded me of. It was like watching an old film reel, playing back moments that had been captured and stored somewhere beyond medical understanding. Whose heart are you carrying, Sarah? She closed her eyes. That's what we need to find out. The deeper I dug into Sarah's case, the more impossible it became. If you're following this medical mystery, make sure to subscribe and drop a comment. Bello, what's the strangest medical experience you've ever heard of? Because what I discovered next would challenge everything I thought I knew about consciousness, memory, and the organ that keeps us all alive. I couldn't sleep that night. Instead, I found myself in my office at 3 a.m., surrounded by patient files and medical journals, searching for any explanation that might make sense of Sarah Chen. That's when I decided to do what I should have done days ago. I pulled her complete medical history, not just from Cedar-Sinai, but from every hospital in the Los Angeles area. What I found made my blood turn to ice. According to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, Sarah Chen had died 3 months ago in a head-on collision on the 405 freeway. The accident report was brutal in its clinical precision. Massive trauma, declared dead at the scene. Body transported to the county morgue for autopsy. But then I found something that shattered my understanding of reality entirely. Sarah's heart had been harvested for donation. I stared at the organ procurement records, my hands shaking as I traced the paper trail. Sarah Chen, pronounced dead July 15th, heart harvested July 16th for emergency transplantation. Recipient, Marcus Webb, 45-year-old construction foreman, suffering from end-stage cardiomyopathy. I pulled Marcus Webb's file with trembling fingers. Marcus had received Sarah's heart on July 17th at UCLA Medical Center. The surgery was successful initially, but complications developed within hours. Acute rejection, they called it, though the anti-rejection medications should have prevented it. His body attacked the new heart with unprecedented violence, as if it were fighting not just foreign tissue, but foreign memories. Marcus Webb died on July 20th, 3 days after receiving Sarah's heart. But the story didn't end there. According to the organ recovery notes, Marcus's body was used for medical research. Specifically, his heart was removed and sent to Cedar-Sinai's Cardiac Research Laboratory for study of acute rejection mechanisms. The heart that had once belonged to Sarah Chen, then briefly to Marcus Webb, ended up in my own research facility. I accessed our lab records with growing horror. The heart had been in our possession for 2 months, undergoing various studies, to understand why the rejection had been so severe and so rapid. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, our head of cardiac research, had been using it to test new preservation techniques. And then, 6 days ago, the same day Sarah Chen walked into our emergency room, the heart had disappeared from the research lab. I sat back in my chair, trying to process what I was reading. The woman sleeping peacefully in room 318 had been dead for 3 months. Her heart had been through 2 different bodies and was supposedly sitting in a research freezer. Yet somehow, she was walking around, talking to me, carrying the memories of every cardiac procedure that Hart had ever witnessed. My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. It was Dr. Walsh. Michael, I know it's late, but I needed to talk to someone. Something very strange has happened in the research lab. Jennifer, what's wrong? You know that heart we've been studying? The one from the rejection case. It's gone. But that's not the strange part. The strange part is that all our other cardiac tissue samples are showing signs of ... activity. What kind of activity? Electrical activity. Rhythmic contractions. Michael, we have preserved heart tissue that's been dead for months, and it's all started beating again. Not just random muscle twitches, coordinated, purposeful contractions. And the EKG patterns ... Her voice trailed off. What about the EKG patterns? They match historical rhythms from patients these hearts never belonged to. It's as if every piece of cardiac tissue in our lab is remembering hearts it's never been connected to. I closed my eyes, the full scope of the nightmare finally becoming clear. Sarah Chen wasn't just carrying her own heart's memories. She was somehow connected to every piece of cardiac tissue that had ever been stored in our research facility. Decades of preserved hearts, all awakening, all remembering. Jennifer, I need you to secure the lab immediately. Don't let anyone in or out. Michael, what's going on? I think we've been studying something we don't understand. Something that connects all cardiac tissue through memories we can't explain. I hung up and ran to Sarah's room. She was awake now, sitting up in bed, watching the sunrise through her window. She turned as I entered, and I saw something in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a deep, ancient sadness. You found out, she said simply. You died 3 months ago. Yes, your heart was transplanted into Marcus Webb. Yes, and then it ended up in our research lab. Yes. She looked down at her hands. But hearts don't just store blood, Dr. Harrison, they store everything. Every emotion, every memory, every moment of connection between one life and another. And when you collect enough hearts in one place, when you study them and preserve them, and keep them in your cold storage, they remember each other, I whispered. They remember everything. Every patient who ever passed through these halls, every surgery performed, every life saved or lost. Your research lab became a repository of cardiac memory spanning decades. But how are you here? How are you walking around? Sarah smiled, that impossibly sad smile. Because some memories are so strong, Dr. Harrison, that they refuse to stay dead. Your lab didn't just preserve tissue, it preserved consciousness. And consciousness, when it has nowhere else to go, finds a way to create a vessel. The monitor above her bed was now displaying a rhythm I had never seen before. Pattern that seemed to incorporate elements from hundreds of different hearts, all beating in impossible harmony. Every heart you've ever worked on is part of me. Now, she continued. Every patient you've saved, every procedure you've performed, every moment of fear and hope and love that passed through your cardiac unit. I remember it all. I stared at her, this impossible woman who had died months ago but sat before me carrying the collective memory of every heart that had ever beat within these walls. What do you want from me? Help me put them to rest, Dr. Harrison. Help me give these memories the peace they deserve. This revelation changes everything I thought I knew about consciousness, memory, and the heart itself. If you're still following this impossible case, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments, do you believe consciousness can survive in ways medical science doesn't understand? Because what happened next would test the very limits of what it means to be alive. The decision I made in that moment would haunt me for the rest of my career, and perhaps define it in ways I never expected. What do you need me to do? I asked Sarah, though part of me already knew the answer would challenge everything I'd sworn to uphold as a physician. The heart's in your research lab, she said, her voice carrying the weight of decades of preserved memories. They need to be released properly. With the respect and ceremony they were denied when they became specimens. Sarah, I can't just destroy years of cardiac research. Those tissue samples represent breakthrough studies in heart disease, rejection mechanisms, preservation techniques, Dr. Harrison. She interrupted, and for the first time since I'd met her, her voice carried an edge of urgency. Do you think this ends with me? Every day that those hearts remain in storage, their memories grow stronger. Soon, other consciousnesses will begin to emerge. Other patients will start walking into hospitals, carrying memories that aren't their own. The thought sent a chill through me. If Sarah was right, she wasn't an isolated incident, she was the first of many. There's something else, she continued. The memories aren't just from cardiac patients. Hearts feel every love, loss, joy. All those emotions get stored in the tissue. Your research lab isn't just holding cardiac memories, Dr. Harrison, it's holding the concentrated emotional experiences of thousands of people. I thought about the dreams plaguing our other patients, the impossible rhythms appearing on monitors throughout the cardiac unit, the way Sarah's presence had awakened something in the very walls of the hospital. If I help you, what happens to you? Sarah smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't sad, it was peaceful. I go where I was supposed to go 3 months ago, and all these borrowed memories finally get to rest. I spent the next hour making the most difficult calls of my career. First to Dr. Reeves, explaining that I needed emergency access to the research facility. Then to Dr. Walsh, asking her to meet me in the lab despite the late hour. Finally, to my wife, telling her I might be very late coming home, and that I loved her. What I didn't tell any of them was that I had no idea if what I was about to do would save Sarah Chen, or destroy my career entirely. Dr. Walsh met us at the research lab at 4 a.m., her face pale but determined. She had spent the night documenting the impossible electrical activity in the preserved tissues, creating a record that would either make medical history or earn us all psychiatric evaluations. "Jennifer, I need you to help me do something that's going to sound insane," I said as we stood outside the lab doors. "We need to respectfully dispose of every cardiac tissue sample in storage." "Michael, that's 20 years of research." "I know, and I'll take full responsibility, but we need to do this now." Before, I looked at Sarah, who nodded encouragingly, before other manifestations begin occurring. What happened next defied everything I understood about medicine, consciousness, and the nature of human existence. As we entered the lab, every piece of preserved cardiac tissue began beating in perfect synchronization. Not the chaotic twitching of dying muscle, but the coordinated rhythm of a living heart. The EKG monitors connected to various samples showed patterns I recognized, hearts from patients I had treated years ago. Decade-old cases, procedures from before Sarah was even born. They're all connected, Sarah whispered, walking among the specimens with something approaching reverence. Every heart that's ever felt love, fear, hope, despair, they remember each other because emotion is universal. Pain is universal. So is healing. Working through the dawn, we performed what I can only describe as a medical ceremony. Each tissue sample was removed from its preservation solution with care and dignity. Sarah spoke to each one, not words I could understand, but something deeper, older, like a language of the heart itself. As each sample was properly interred in the hospital's memorial garden, the supernatural phenomena in the cardiac unit began to fade. The impossible rhythms on the monitors returned to normal. The surgical sounds echoing through empty rooms fell silent. The patients on the cardiac floor reported that their dreams of heart surgery had been replaced by peaceful, healing sleep, and Sarah grew progressively more translucent, more ethereal, as if letting go of the borrowed memories was allowing her to finally release her hold on physical existence. "Dr. Harrison," she said as we watched the sunrise from the memorial garden, her voice now barely a whisper. "Thank you for helping them find peace." "Sarah, what will I tell people? How do I explain what happened here?" "Tell them the truth. Tell them that hearts remember everything, not just the medical procedures, but the human connections, the moments when one person's skill and compassion saves another's life, the trust between patient and doctor, the hope that healing brings." She was fading now, becoming more memory than substance. "And tell them that sometimes, when we preserve tissue for research, we need to remember we're not just studying organs, studying the vessels of human experience." "Will I see you again?" "Every time you perform a procedure with genuine compassion, you'll feel an echo of every heart you've ever helped heal." "That's not supernatural, Dr. Harrison. That's just what it means to be truly connected to your patients." Sarah Chen disappeared with the morning light, leaving me alone in the memorial garden with questions that would reshape my entire approach to cardiology. The official report I filed cited unusual electromagnetic interference as the cause of the equipment malfunctions. Dr. Reeves accepted my explanation for the disposal of the research tissues as a contamination protocol. The hospital administration was satisfied that the disruptions to the cardiac unit had ceased. But I know the truth. I know that hearts remember everything, every emotion, every connection, every moment of healing or loss. And in my practice now, I approach every cardiac procedure not just as a medical intervention, but as a sacred trust with the vessel of human memory itself. I've never experienced another case like Sarah Chen's, but I've noticed changes in how I relate to my patients. I listen more carefully to their fears and hopes. I hold space not just for their physical healing, but for the emotional memories their hearts carry. And sometimes, in the quiet moments during a procedure, I feel connected to something larger, a network of healing that spans every heart I've ever touched. The other day, a young resident asked me what advice I'd give to someone just starting in cardiology. I told him that we're not just treating organs, we're caring for the repositories of human experience. Every heart that beats in our hands carries a lifetime of emotions, connections, and memories. Remember, I said, that healing isn't just about restoring function, it's about honoring the experiences that heart has carried and helping create new memories of hope, recovery, and renewed life. He looked at me strangely, probably wondering if the stress of cardiac surgery had finally gotten to his attending physician. But someday, if he practices with enough compassion and attention, he might understand what I mean. Because hearts remember everything. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, they remember us too. This case changed everything about how I practice medicine and understand the connection between doctor and patient. If this story moved you or made you think differently about the relationship between consciousness and the human body, please subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever felt that unexplainable connection between healer and patient? Do you believe that our bodies hold memories beyond what science currently understands? And if you're in the medical field, I'd love to hear about your own unexplained experiences, because I'm convinced that Sarah Chen wasn't an isolated incident. There are mysteries in medicine that we're only beginning to understand. The heart, as I've learned, remembers everything. The question is, are we listening?